All right, welcome everybody. We're just going to give everyone a few minutes to join here and then we'll kick things off. How you doing today, Sneha?
I'm doing good. What about you?
I'm good. It's a little gloomy here today, so
It
I'm really
is.
hoping the sun comes out.
Yeah, I was just about to say that it's a little gloomy today, so fingers crossed.
The weather is so unpredictable. Like one day I walk outside and it feels like full-blown summer. Like Easter weekend, I was in shorts and a tank top. Like full-blown summer. And now I'm like, I could do sweatpants, I think, and a sweatshirt out there.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I keep noticing every time I come to the Bay Area is like different parts. If you go to Redwood City or if you go to San Jose, those areas, the temperature is so different versus just in the Bay. Like, I would love to go out without a jacket for once, but it just doesn't seem to be on the radar for that to happen. So
Yes, very true. Very true. All right, we're 2 minutes in, so let's kick this off. Welcome, everybody. You are here for your contact center's ROI scorecard. Will it pass or will it fail? This is a good one. I'm excited to see how you guys rate your scorecards after this. I am Jacquie Kenney, and I'm thrilled to be here today with my lovely co host, Sneha. Together, her and I live and breathe ROI. She is on my speed dial at all times, talking about all things coaching effectiveness, AI accuracy, whatever it may be. We're really working together hand in hand to talk about how we can expand the value of every customer interaction. So, Sneha, why don't you go ahead and intro yourself?
yeah, thanks, Jackie. And before I introduce myself, I'm really excited for this conversation today. Jackie, as you mentioned, I think this is our bread and butter. We live and breathe this. So we have a lot of good things that we're going to be discussing in today's conversation. But hey, everyone, I'm Sneha. I lead the customer value and analytics department here. Jackie and I, we work very closely. We partner with operations teams, with analytics departments, with the executives to translate conversation level data into enterprise level results. And in today's conversation, we are really going to be pulling back the curtains on how the most forward looking contact centers are not just measuring success, but how are they redefining return on investment, right? And more importantly, how do you avoid traps that make your teams look like they're busy, but they're not really delivering true business impact? Now, we understand that most folks here, you're well versed with tracking key success metrics for your contact centers. And so Jackie and I, we want to go a step further than that and talk about, how do you invalidate some of the metrics as much as you spend efforts on validating those and a lot more along those lines. Over to you, Jackie, for some housekeeping items.
All right, the boring stuff before we get into the fun stuff. Oh, okay. Technology doesn't want to work for us today. Okay, before we get started, just overall drop your questions in the chat throughout. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So we'll weave them in throughout the conversation. If we're not able to get to it, we also have a Q&A section at the end. Yes, this session will be recorded, and yes, you will get an email with not only the recording, but also all of the resources as a follow-up. So with that, let's dive into our icebreaker.
Yeah, so I don't know how many of you are new in the audience here, but Jackie and I, we always love to, get things started with a fun icebreaker question. No wrong answers here. We encourage you to participate, drop in your answers in the chat. But yeah, here's the question. If you could instantly know one true ROI of a contact center activity, what is that going to be? While we wait for some answers, Jackie, do you have one?
I have one, but I feel like it's going to be yours, and I don't want to steal your thunder. So what? I think we're both on the same wavelength. So you go.
Okay. I think for me, it just boils down to coaching effectiveness or those supervisor coaching moments, right? When you during those mid shift huddles, during call reviews that happen off the radar, if you could instantly just measure the impact of what that 10-minute coaching session did after an escalated call to the rest of the performance for the day, right? What it did in terms of how did it influence the CSAT? How did it influence the retention saves? Just the impact that a 10-minute session could have on the following conversations. I think that's such a powerful story to tell. And one of the things that I keep talking about always is, hey, it's great to understand the root cause analysis of, hey, what's causing high handle time, what's causing non-conversion, what's causing low CSAT. We can surface all of those insights for you, but at the end of the day, those insights, they need to be actionable. They need to be coached upon. And the only way to attribute true success to any solution that you invest in is the ability to measure that coaching effectiveness.
Yes, I love that. And it looks like we've got some quiet folks today. So no pressure, but I love your answer, Sneha. We hear this all the time, right? When we're talking to our contact center leaders. Everyone wants to talk about ROI, right? But it's always in the form of cost savings or a dashboard, which is okay, right? And that's a part of it. But what I love to do is shift the conversation around outcomes. And so, okay, we want cost savings in this, or okay, we want this dashboard, but what are you really trying to achieve? And really starting the conversation there. And it nicely evolves into, where are you as a business, right? Do you have a coaching program or do you not, as an example? And it really starts developing this thoughtful conversation of, what is the right approach for you and your business? And that's when things become so pivotal, and coaching is, quite honestly, the biggest piece of it. So that excites me. I love that. With that, ROI conversations, right, really aren't about cost savings anymore. It's about so much more, to Sneha's point. So let's talk about the metrics that matter in 2025 and beyond. And this is the time to really think about your ROI scorecard and see what you should potentially change around. So let's launch our first poll. So, which of these hidden metrics do you think has the most untapped ROI potential? And you can just answer directly on the screen. So just click A, B, C, or D, or E. And while we're giving you guys a second to answer, Sneha, why don't you kind of talk about a little bit of the KPIs and what you think is an untapped potential?
Yeah. And I think this is such an important conversation to have, because a lot of time, just given how quickly things move, we're all trying to achieve our quarterly goals. We sometimes tend to miss the bigger picture. We either end up chasing, a sole metric, and we need to take a step back and truly assess, is this the outcome that I want to achieve? Is this metric that I'm chasing, is it going to truly deliver the kind of results that's going to help the broader organization? Or am I overlooking something else that could drive more success than just focusing on a specific set of metrics, right? And so let's unpack some of these, and these are all great ones. And I know I just touched upon, the supervisor coaching effectiveness. I do want to talk about a few other bullets that we have on the slide, especially around first contact resolution, after call work. So for first contact resolution, I feel very 50-50 about this, more so because in a lot of conversations that I've had with prospects, with customers, some organizations, they track this aggressively, they track it consistently. And when I speak to some, they don't even have a starting point, right? When it comes to defining, what does a first contact resolution mean? Or if we want to reverse that, what would be the repeat contact rate? On an average, how many touch points would be needed for them to solve a complex case type, right? These metrics, a lot of times, they're not even tracked. And one of the things with first contact resolution is, while this is a tricky metric to track, it has such an impact on the downstream metrics like customer satisfaction, customer sentiment, the cost per call, right? So I think FCR is definitely, it plays a huge role in just impacting, having a cascading impact on the other metrics or pillars of a contact center. Talking about after call work, and this is honestly my favorite one for those who've attended some of our previous webinar sessions. I'm pretty biased about this one. I think it's the easiest way to impact your handle time optimization. So after call work is part of your average handle time. And a lot of times there may not be an opportunity to reduce your talk time between an agent and a customer. But when your agents are spending, say, maybe 2 to 4 minutes after every conversation manually taking notes, now that is the first opportunity for you to optimize or bring down your overall handle time, right? One, it's going to help you eliminate that inconsistency in note taking. But not just that, once you automate it, it's going to free up so much time for your agents. It's going to give them more call exposure, increase their productivity. So for me, ACW is not just an easy one to track, but it's also one of the most powerful metrics when it comes to handle time. And now, because we're on the topic of handle time, and this one's something that I've been waiting to bust some myths on. So when we talk about handle time, I've seen a lot of customers come to us with, hey, we want to optimize our handle time. And handle time is one of the most appealing metrics. I'll tell you why, because it's very easy to measure, very easy to, build dashboards, reports off of it. But sometimes it can be very, very misleading because short calls are not always the best calls, right? There could be instances where if the calls are extremely short, you don't necessarily want to award those agents for being best performers due to short calls. If you take a step, if you dig into what's really happening in those conversations, you may notice that your agents are often rushing. They are transferring a lot of those calls. Sometimes there's call abandonment. They're deflecting or skipping some of the key discovery probing steps that are really required to build that relationship with the customers, right? We've even seen some agents game the system by cutting the calls extremely short by just constantly transferring it one after another. So when we work with customers who come with AHT as a sole metric, one of the recommendations I always give them is you need to combine this with another outcome metric. And that could be something like your call experience. You could track your call experience through your QA score. It could be mapping it with CSAT. It could be mapping it with resolution. Because, like I said, as much as you want the calls to be shorter, you also want to make sure that you're providing a good experience for them. So for me, like, short calls are the best calls. That's definitely one of the things that we hear so commonly, which is not always the case. It's a very misused metric. And I think the other one's around compliance. This one's another favorite of mine, more so because this is a little controversial when you bring up with a lot of prospects and customers, and I'll tell you why, right? So most organizations, they're tracking percentages. They're tracking, hey, are my agents, what's my record blind disclosure rate? What's my non-compliance rate? Very few are able to assign a dollar value to it. Like, what does that cost of non-compliance look like? And we understand that you're not always going to be slapped with legal fines or fees for being non-compliant. There are a few different ways you could really think through when it comes to mapping or tracking compliance, right? And one such metric is if your agents are consistently non-compliant, there are a few different things that can happen in terms of impacting the workflows. One is you may put your agents on a probationary period. Two, you're going to spend time on retraining those agents to make sure that they are compliant, right? And three, even after multiple coaching sessions, if there is no improvement, then you might have to let go of those agents. And so there is additional cost associated with retraining, with restaffing them. And that cost component tends to get missed sometimes when we're looking at compliance. So for me, these are definitely some untapped, hidden metrics that if you're not already tracking, now would be the time to start tracking these. What about you, Jackie?
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said. And I think overall, I wholeheartedly agree with the supervisor coaching effectiveness as probably the number one hidden metric. But I do think everything on this page, can be like untapped, but supervisor effectiveness and compliance are two that don't come up in conversations often, but they do come up as these secondary conversations of, how are you going to get from point A to point B? And yes, you don't care about compliance today, but what happens if you do have an audit, or what happens when, an event does happen? And then the conversation really opens up around all of these costs associated with it, and issues. And so definitely agree with what you said. I also have a few that aren't on this slide that I think are some untapped potential, or maybe things that are misunderstood, and to kind of fall into this myths trend that we're talking about. Let's talk about like what we hear about them. So first is CSAT, right? Your customer satisfaction score. This is such a common one, right? And everybody wants to impact that, of course, because the customer experience is number one. That is your key differentiator. The myth, though, is if CSAT is high, everything must be fine. I love that one. And the reality is, and Sneha, you talk about this a lot with our customers as well, CSAT only reflects such a small sample size of your customers, right? You're sending it out once a quarter, if not even more, less frequent than that. And your response rates can be, as low as 5%, but let's just say 10% for the lack of a more specific stat. But you think about, you're only looking at, say, 10%, and maybe your CSAT score is 5.5. In reality, it's this inflated stat where you think you're doing so well. But we have sentiment scores in our system on a 3-point scale, so -1, 0, 1. And when we start looking at our customer calls and pulling in, say, that extra 90% that they were missing, we find out that the calls are actually at a 0.17 sentiment score. So you go from this 5.5 to this negative 0.17, and you start realizing, oh, wow, I am missing this true voice of the customer. And, the survey, while can serve a purpose, it's really missing the mark in terms of driving these strong business insights and allowing you as a business to be proactive versus reactive. So that's another big one for me. QA scores. All of our QA folks on the phone, or just contact center folks, will love this one. QA is just for compliance. Absolute myth. Most QA forms reward processes, not outcomes. But QA can be the most predictive engine in the business, right? If you use QA correctly, you're flagging risks, you're flagging revenue opportunities, upsell missed opportunities, you're surfing coaching opportunities, like so much. QA is really sitting on everything that matters for the business. All we need to do is figure out what are the forms and what are the avenues in which we can pull that out for the business to see them in a different way, right? So a 95% QA score, as an example, that might look great, right? But did we miss the coaching opportunity around, were they being empathetic? Did they persuade? Did they save that customer from churning? So many other secondary, if you will, things that you can pull out of that original QA score. So the way I like to think of it now is QA is really the strategic intelligence function, right? So how do we up-level them and give them the tools to be that strategic intelligence function, and really be a part of the conversation of where should the business go next and what is prioritizing. Call volume, right? More calls equals more productivity. What do you think, Sneha? Fact or myth?
That's definitely a myth. Yeah, that's definitely a myth. Like, I would say yes, more calls. A lot of organizations traditionally, they do consider call volume as part of agent productivity, because they want to make sure that they're well staffed to handle that influx. But just having that as a sole metric, like, hey, if you're taking more calls, you're more productive, that is not the right way to go about it.
Yeah, Absolutely. I think about me as a consumer, right? What if I have so many other questions? I want that agent to not rush me off the phone. I want to feel like I really had everything resolved. And, that's a value per conversation, right? And the longer, the better for me. Okay, last one. You can't measure empathy. Definitely a myth. You absolutely can, contextually and at scale. I think it's really around the tone, the language, the responses. All of this can be tracked. It just needs to be tracked together, and so that you can evaluate what is happening. And we're really seeing this being correlated directly to key KPIs that can hit bottom line for businesses. So things like save rates, revenue increases, things like that. So we just hit you with a lot of hidden metrics and untapped potential. There's a lot of ways you could go with your scorecard, but I think ultimately it's really around, are you thinking about, those surface level, or are you thinking a little bit more around, those 2, 3, 4 layers deeper that are truly going to change the game there?
Yeah, and I think there's another one, and I know Jacquie and I we've gone on the spiel of ours, giving you so many of these untapped and hidden metrics. But I think another one which a lot of you might really resonate with, and it tends to come top down, is hey, we just need to cut costs, right? And sure, cost savings matter, but you can't really shrink your way to sustainable return on investment. Like if you're trying to cut costs without increasing value, it's almost like removing your engine to make the car lighter, but you're not going anywhere with it, right? So yes, metrics matter, cost savings matter, but can you hit two birds with one stone? Outside of cost savings, is there anything else that you can simultaneously impact? Can we reflect on what's truly going to move the needle to help you achieve, the success metrics that you've set up for yourselves? So one thing that we would want you to take away is let's stop confusing activity with impact, right? So the future of redefining what success means is all about backtracking, your outcomes. How can we measure value-based, outcome-based success? Jacquie, do you have anything else to add before we move on to the next segment?
No, I think that last sentence just hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, and just taking a look at the poll results too, I feel like what we touched on the very beginning around supervisor coaching effectiveness and FCR, yeah, it does look like it resonates with a good amount of the audience. But I am pretty surprised that compliance error rate is not something anyone's thought of, because it does have such an impact. I mean, there's reputational impact when it comes to compliance. It can get really ugly if it gets into like the legal space. So legal fines, litigation fees. So that's something we might just want to be. It's better to be cautious than to be sorry, right? So if you can avoid non-compliance up front, you never know when you might get audited. So it's always a good metric to stay on top of your ROI scorecard.
Yeah, and I guess just to add one final thing there, this one's tough, right? And I think it takes a conversation to have this be added into the scorecard, right? So if there's one thing that you guys walk away with today in terms of what to do next with your scorecard, it's really, maybe creating two columns around hard costs versus soft cost, right? And it doesn't mean that soft cost isn't just as important. It's just not the cost that is going to hit the business immediately or just be as visually seen, but very much critical, right? And so compliance, I do see a little bit more as a soft cost. But to your point, Sneha, if and when it happens, that then has a huge downstream impact. Reputation is everything nowadays, right? It's all about the brand loyalty and us as consumers believing in the brand. So if we don't have that, then there's going to be a problem. And so I think, doing that hard versus soft cost column may help you start to understand, okay, here's what I need to just move the needle because this is critical. And here's also some other things that are critical, but maybe not as priority or, you know, top of the conversation with, the buying committee or my leadership at this moment in time. But that way you're not forgetting about it entirely.
Yeah, yeah. And I love that differentiation between hard and soft costs. And I'm 100% aligned that, if you're not already doing it, it's a good way to get started on reassessing your ROI scorecards. All right. I think we've spent a good amount of time on this poll, but don't kill us. We are going to come at you with another poll right after this. So, as we've talked a lot about, the hidden untapped metrics, we also want to spend some time discussing, hey, by the end of 2025, which emerging KPI do you think is going to become standard, right? So, we have a bunch of traditional contact center metrics, but we're now, with this whole AI revolution, we're beginning to notice a switch in the kind of metrics that contact centers are beginning to track. And we want to throw some light on that. But go ahead and submit your answers in terms of what you think is going to be your top emerging KPI for the contact centers by the end of this year.
Gosh, this is an exciting one. As we're waiting for responses before we kind of dive into the KPIs of the future, let's set a little bit of the foundation. So I think there's three really big shifts that we're seeing in the market in terms of how ROI is being defined. And some of you may be already thinking about them, but maybe there's one or two that are new. So Sneha said it before, ROI is now outcome-based, not activity-based. This is a big one, right? So it's the shift from traditional metrics like call volume and handle time, like we talked about earlier, to more business aligned outcomes, right? Did we save the customer from churning? Did we expand our revenue or uplift our revenue more than we projected, right? Did we avoid that compliance risk or fine? And did we make an impact with the coaching? So slight shifts, but you'll see much more not this is what happened, but did we make a difference? Did we make an impact? Number two, visibility is your new baseline. This is where you need to start and end every single day. In 2025, if you are still sampling 2% of your calls, you are operating in a severe blind spot, right? Think about the CSAT example we gave before. 5% response rate, CSAT was 5.5, phenomenal. But when we looked at all of their calls, their sentiment score, which can be correlated very much with CSAT, was actually in the negative. So modern ROI analyses really depends on conversation intelligence. We need to be looking at every call, every chat, every nuance. Number three is ROI equals value per interaction, not just volume. And this is what we talked about earlier with the myths, right? We are not in the contact center space in the business of taking more calls. That is not our goal. Our goal is turning every conversation into a result. So, whatever that result may be defined as within your business, that is the goal. So, how do we start adding value to the interaction? So, maybe that means our AHT goes up and we change that from our core KPI to secondary. But what are we doing in that conversation to bring value, not getting that agent off of the call as quickly as possible to handle more? So with that, let's fast forward to where contact centers are heading next, and let's see some poll results.
Yeah. Okay, AI accuracy score and sentiment conversion impact. I love that. For me, definitely. I know I talked about agent coaching being like a true contact center if I were to choose one, but where we're headed in terms of the KPIs that are going to become standard, I'm 100% aligned on sentiment to conversion impact. What do you think about the AI accuracy score, Jackie?
I am personally loving the scores around AI accuracy. I think this is so critical. It's not just about precision, right? It's about is AI surfacing the insights that actually lead to the behavioral change, right? And so when I talk about is it leading to the change, it's not just accuracy, it's completeness, right? A good model should understand the nuances. Sneha, you're going to laugh at me because I use this example all the time.
What is
But
that?
an agent's on the phone and the agent says, let me ask you a stupid question. If the AI is accurate, it might say that's what the agent said. And maybe as a QA person, we're going to have a performance conversation with the agent around like, we don't need that. But completeness would be the agent asked a stupid question. They're on a sales call. They're trying to build rapport. So they brought in a little bit of just humanality to it. And so with that, me as a QA person, I would mark them as you did a great job. Yes, you handled it. Right. And so it's a silly example, but it's such a good one to just help understand context awareness around AI really does matter. And so that's a real win. So AI accuracy plus completeness is a really big shift, and I think a really critical one here.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. I think in the next slide, what we really want to do is just give you a side-by-side view of some of the traditional metrics that everyone's been tracking so far, and what are some of the emerging KPIs that we think are going to become standardized, right? So on the left, when we're talking about the traditional KPIs, these are, hey, I want to optimize my handle time. I want to measure speed. It's not necessarily effectiveness. QA scores, right? So a lot of times, traditionally, to Jackie's point, we're still doing 2%, 3% of the total call volume is what's being manually audited. We need to move away from that and bring in a lot of automation, right? I know it gets a little difficult, especially with subjective questions to automate those, but now with AI, you have the ability to, automate even those subjective questions. Call volume, inbound load. So this is what Jackie was talking about again. Right? So call volume is not necessarily, it does not equate to productivity. Speed to answer, a very common metric that contact centers track, right? Abandonment rate, transfer rates, you have your CSAT score, first call resolution. So I think the one common theme on the left is they're all they're metrics which are that can be easily tracked, but it's not always mapped to an outcome. And so on the right, when we talk about the emerging KPIs, and this is something we've seen as a switch in what our customers and prospects are asking us on the daily too, is, hey, can we overlay our CSAT score with your sentiment models, right? Can we use that as our North Star versus just focusing on the responses that we get in 3 or 5% of the total calls, right? Because the reason why we do recommend overlaying your CSAT scores or NPS results with our sentiment model is it gives you a holistic picture, and it's not going to paint your agents in a bad light, right? So a lot of times there are things which are beyond your agent's control. Like a simple example of me probably ordering some food from, an online food delivery app, and then maybe a part of the item ingredient is missing, or maybe because I'm a vegetarian that I realize there's a piece of meat in it. I'm going to go back to the contact service agent and I'm going to tell that person, hey, I need a full refund for this. Now, there are certain policies that they need to adhere to when it comes to providing that refund. And while I'm really frustrated that I cannot eat this food and I want a full refund, maybe, and this is just hypothetical, right? Maybe they can only give me a partial refund. So the agent has done everything in their power to follow the policy and try to satisfy, my need. But because I came in that conversation with a completely different expectation and that was not met, right after the conversation ends, I maybe say like a neutral score, or maybe I'm not satisfied, right? So me saying not satisfied, unfortunately, is going to impact that agent's performance because, the CSAT for that agent ended up being low. And so in situations like these where you want to avoid that bias, if you introduce AI-based sentiment scores, it's just going to give you a much better picture of all the things that are happening in the conversation and what's truly the sentiment of the customer and the agent and that call. Retention save rates, right? So this is again an interesting one. A lot of times we're talking about, hey, I want to see how can I increase my revenue? How can I increase my conversions? There's a flip side to that, which also drives revenue, and that's going to be how can I save people from canceling what they've purchased, right? How can I save customers from churning? So that's a pretty important metric when it comes to driving revenue, just as much as new sales. Coaching effectiveness, talked about it a few times already. Talking about compliance risk avoidance. Again, I briefly touched upon this. This does quantify the potential exposure prevented via monitoring, right? So right now we're just monitoring it as compliance adherence score, but we need to go a step further and start looking at, hey, if your agents are non-compliant, then what? Always keep asking the question, then what, right? Repeat contact rate. Again, this is the flip side of first contact resolution. A lot of times and this, like I said, has a downstream impact on their satisfaction. It's going to have even cost per call, right? If someone's constantly reaching out to you, they're going to be so frustrated. It's not just going to add more cost for your contact center because of the repeat calls. You might end up losing that customer because you were not able to provide resolution in a quicker span of time. Revenue per interaction or your upsells. This, again, I'm seeing this as a use case which was becoming so common now, like almost like a service-based sales use case, right? Like you come into the contact center with, hey, I need you to resolve XYZ issue. And then once the issue is resolved, depending on the customer's profile, you have the ability to upsell or cross-sell a specific solution or a product to them. And so we're seeing all of these trends picking up already. We're almost mid 2025, and we kind of see this becoming standard for the rest of the year. But having said that, I think the one thing that we do want to leave you with is by the end of 2025, the most important KPI outside of everything that we've just outlined is going to be an amalgamation of everything we've outlined. And that's going to be your conversation value index, right? So it's going to be one composite metric, which is going to blend customer experience, revenue, compliance, efficiency, all into one lens. And we're already helping customers build this today. But when you start thinking about, what needs to be part of your ROI scorecards, the conversation value index is definitely something you need to start looking at.
Absolutely. And just to kind of add on to this, for some of you who may, be a little bit overwhelmed or wondering, where do I even begin, right? Like, we're already tracking all these traditional KPIs. How do I now shift to emerging? That's okay, right? I think we just need to be aware and start actively working to shift it. The other thing that's critical is you don't need to start doing all of these KPIs today or even tomorrow or even a month from now. The only thing that you need to start having the conversation on is evaluating where you're at as a business, right? And based on where you're at, what do you have in your tools and processes to start this, right? So for example, coaching effectiveness. Maybe you don't have a coaching program today. So to even start tracking that, you are going to have some serious workflows and processes, et cetera. So it's evaluating what are the things that are going to matter the most for the business and maybe choose the top 2 or 3, and then really having those hard conversations internally. Am I prepared to start improving upon that, right? And these are the difficult conversations we have a lot with our contact center leaders. Like, you want revenue to increase by 2%. Like, that's large when you think about all of the things that have to happen, right? Do you have a coaching program today? Are your agents using some sort of a tool where you can provide real-time feedback, et cetera, et cetera? And so it's just very critical to not only understand the KPIs from traditional to emerging that matter most to you, but also what's required in order to start influencing that KPI. And do you have that? And if not, that's okay. But you have to start where you're at. And so really start evaluating from that perspective. Here's where I am. What's the phased approach to help me get to where I want to be? Sneha, I know you feel passionate about this too. Anything else to add there?
Oh, I think that's all. I feel like we've definitely overwhelmed the audience with a lot of points today. So I do want to, take a pause and see if anyone's got any questions for us. Okay, I do see one in the chat, and Jackie, let me know if you want to take this, or maybe we could both alternate. So, do you think that human coaching is best, or can knowledge articles or interactive advice take the place? Not sure what you think about the pros and cons.
Yeah, here's my answer. I think it's important to have a hybrid approach. Both serve a purpose that's really important, right? When you think about even yourself, if I was an agent or just as an employee, that real time feedback to handle a conversation better, right, it is going to be extremely helpful. So I think that real time knowledge articles, all those sorts of things, is going to be important. Agents are handling so many different conversations. The conversations can go in a million different directions. So to have a resource that is up for them to grab and feel confident, feel prepared, right? One of the biggest reasons for turnover right now is agent burnout and feeling like they don't have the tools and resources. So to not have to have a million windows open to find that answer versus one screen, let me just access my knowledge base article and answer the question effectively. Absolutely. But the other thing that's also critical is that human coaching. I don't think that, in my mind, and this is just my personal opinion, but I don't think that human coaching is going to go away anytime soon, right? There is a difference between getting help on a call and having those resources and also learning and developing, right? So, for example, if I need help on a call because a customer is upset, that in the moment coaching is going to be helpful. But if, say, I personally keep struggling with how to handle a pricing objection, as an example, I can get in the moment guidance, right? But it's also helpful to see what other agents are doing really well, right? Listening to their calls, seeing how they're flowing through the conversation to just help me start building that context and preparing for that so that I can in turn be better during the live call. So I don't know if you have anything to add, Sneha, but that's where I think they both serve a really strong purpose, and it's just defining when to use what. And also just seeing what works for that agent as well, right? We all learn so differently. And so it might just be a very tailored approach across the business.
Yeah, I think that was spot on. That's probably what my answer would have been too. The only thing that I would add is, yes, with the hybrid approach, you will have knowledge based articles that are going to help provide those dynamic prompts to your agents real time. But your knowledge based articles may not necessarily teach the agents the tone of delivery, right, of those objections. And so those are critical points, touch points, where having a human in the loop can really help when it comes to, hey, you have the knowledge based article to tell you how you need to rebuttal to this objection, but I'm here to teach you how to deliver that rebuttal to make sure that we're giving the best customer experience possible. I hope that answered your question, Stephanie. If there's anything else, please do put it on the chat.
Wonderful.
Okay. Any other questions? Now is your time to ask. Okay, doesn't look like we have any other questions in the chat. Jackie, do you want to give it another minute before we
Yeah.
close it out, or?
Yeah, let's give them just one more minute. And I'm going to pop this slide back up just in case people want to look at this for a question. looks like Stephanie did have to hop early. So, Stephanie,
Oh,
if you're listening to this recording, we'll follow up with you and make sure you get your question answered.
yep.
All
Okay.
right.
Yeah, it looks like we have a pretty quiet audience today, but hopefully this was something that resonated with all of you and something that you can all take back and start incorporating in your day-to-day workflows. If there's something Jackie and I do want you to take away from today's conversation, it's that ROI is not just a report, it's not just a dashboard, it's a mindset. And some of the best contact centers, they're not just tracking these KPIs, they're actually asking the question, why does this matter? What changed because of impacting XYZ metrics, right? So if we constantly keep asking the why, so what changed, I think that's just going to narrow down how you want to achieve success so much more better than where everyone's at right now. That's what Jackie and I want you to take away from the session today.
Absolutely. So thank you everybody for spending the time with us. As I mentioned at the beginning, the recording and follow-up materials are coming your way. We do this on a monthly basis to just talk about, what's happening in the market. The next one, the big thing in the market is all about AI agents and really talking about legacy to Gen AI powered CX. So Sneha is going to be really having some conversations around what does this mean? What do we need to start thinking through? So hope to see you next month in that session on Thursday, May 22nd. And with that, thank you all very much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.